Hello Year 3-4. So I'm going to kick this off. Our new lower key stage 2 story is Sunday night, so I thought I'd do it before we start tomorrow on the new phase of what we're doing. And so we're going to start with, if you've seen the email, a Michael Moore Pergo book called Toto, and it's the Wizard of Oz story, if you know that, which most of you do after the carnival last year, but it's told from the point of view of Toto the dog. So we'll give it a little go. It starts off with a prologue, so let's see how far we get with that. Okay. The prologue says, I was there. That was how Papa Toto always began his story. I was there. There were 7 of us puppies, and that's a lot, and I was the littlest. Papa Toto always called me Tiny Toto. Whenever Mama lay down in the basket to feed us, my brothers and sisters just trampled all over me to get to her first. Mama hardly noticed me. I was so small, but Papa Toto did. He always saw to it there was a proper place for me, and when the others pushed me off, he'd nose them away to make room for me. Without Papa Toto, I guess I wouldn't ever have had enough milk, would probably never have lived to grow up at all, and tell the tale. Papa Toto's tale was the best part of every day for me. Papa Toto would wait till Mama had climbed out of the basket and gone out of the house with all the people folk, like Dorothy, who Papa Toto loved almost as much as he loved me. And that wasn't just because I was the littlest and the best looking, but because I was the only one who was always still awake at the end of his story. We didn't see too much of him during the day. He was out most of the day on the farm, working alongside Dorothy and Uncle Henry and Aunt Em, ploughing and sowing. Of course, Papa Toto didn't do all the chores himself. That was people folks' work. But he did drive the cows, keep an eye out for snakes and wolves and the like, and chase rabbits and rats and mice whenever and wherever he found them. And on the lazy hot days, he'd just hang around, making sure Dorothy didn't come to harm. It's what I'm for, he'd tell us. Wherever she goes, I go. But now you little uns are around, Dorothy says I gotta look after you from time to time, give your mama a break from you. But I don't want none of your wriggling and clambering and tumbling out like you do, and no chewing on my tail. No piddling in the basket, do you hear? Dorothy don't like it when you piddle on the floor neither. And don't go pestering me for food, 'cause you ain't gonna get none. I've told you time and again that's what your mama does, not me. You just lie still and go to sleep. But lying still only ever happened when we were all fast asleep, and Papa Toto had his own special way of getting us to do that. He'd be telling us one of his stories, and sure enough, pretty soon all the wriggling and clambering and the tumbling stopped, and we'd all be lying there still and listening, all 7 of us. And then, one by one, they'd all drop off to sleep, and in the end, I'd often be the only one left awake, because I always wanted to hear what happened in the end. The way I saw it, there wasn't much point in listening to the beginning of a story if you didn't hear how it finished. Of course, I knew what happened in the end. We'd all heard Papa Toto's stories often enough, but it was the way he told them that kept me awake, kept me listening, like he was there inside the story, and I was right there with him. Even so, I've got to say, but don't you go telling him now. I did drop off sometimes during his tales, but there was only one story I stayed awake to hear from beginning to end, the one about the Wizard of Oz, the one he always began with, I was there. Papa Toto especially loved telling that story, and we loved hearing it. The way he told it, you just had to believe every last word of it. Of course, I never believed it afterwards, but I wanted to. It was funny and frightening and sad and silly and weird and wonderful and so amazing and exciting that I never wanted to go to sleep, however warm and snug and full up with milk I was. That was Papa Toto's best tale, the one I longed for, the one I never fell asleep in. He'd climb into our basket in the corner of the room, turn around and round, and then lie down carefully, trying not to squash any of us, but he always did, and this time it was me. Sorry, Tiny Toto, he said, nudging me gently with his cold, cold nose. He waited until all the squealing and squeaking had stopped, till we were all snuggled up to him and ready for the story. I was there, he began, and those magic words sent shivers down my spine. It was going to be the wizard story. Dorothy and me were both there. She never tells Uncle Henry or Aunt Em this story anymore because they won't believe her. She told me that one day, when she has children of her own, she'll tell them, because children know how to believe. Well, pups are children too, right? So I can tell you. Think of that. You little pups will know this story before any people folks know it, except Dorothy, of course, and me. We were all silent, snuggled up together, all of us lying there waiting, waiting. Then Papa Toto began. Well, little pups, my tale begins in this very house, in this very room, in this very basket. Chapter 1's called A Giant Monster of a Twister. I was lying right here, deep in my dreams in this very basket, when I was woken up by the sound of the wind roaring and howling around the house, rattling the doors and windows, shaking the whole place. I never heard a wind like it. The door blew open, so I got up and went outside. Everyone was rushing around, Dorothy trying to shut the hens into the hen house, but they were skittering all over the place. They didn't want to go inside, of course they didn't. It wasn't getting dark yet. The hens never go to bed before dark. What was Dorothy thinking of? Uncle Henry was driving the cattle into the barn, but they didn't want to go in either, and he was calling for me to come and help him, but I had to sleep still in my head and didn't want to. Anyway, he was managing well enough on his own, I thought, without me. Aunt Em was trying to shut the barn doors, but the wind wouldn't let her. She was blown off her feet and went rolling over and over like a tumbleweed. Dorothy saw what was happening, left her hens and ran to help Aunt Em up onto her feet, and together with Uncle Henry, they managed to shut the barn door. Then they did some more chasing round, getting old Barney, our plough horse, into his stable, rounding up the pigs, and that wasn't easy either. And all the while they were hollering at each other about a great storm coming in, and how the clouds were dark in the north, and how that was a bad sign. "If I'm not mistaken, there's a twister on the way," Uncle Henry was bellowing. "I'll eat my hat else." And then suddenly he didn't have any hat on his head anymore. It had blown away. So I went after it. I love a good old hat chase, especially when there's a wind blowing over the prairies in Kansas. As Uncle Henry often says, maybe other folks in other places invented the wheel and writing and all that clever stuff, but in Kansas we invented the wind. Anyways, I went chasing that hat of Uncle Henry's just about all over Kansas and caught up with it down by the creek, where it landed in the water, and I dived right in, grabbed it in my teeth and trotted back home, head high, tail high, pretty darn pleased with myself. I've always been like that. If I'm chasing after something, hats especially, I put just about everyone and everything else out of my mind. But now the chase was over, and I could hear Dorothy screaming for me to come home. I could see her now, standing on the veranda of the farmhouse, and right behind her, and nearly right above her, came this giant monster of a twister, just roaring and raging, towering up into the sky, taking the barn with it, making splinters of it, and the fences too, and the rain tubs, swirling and swallowing the lot. Well, I ran. I took the steps up the veranda in one bound, and jumped right into Dorothy's arms. "Where have you been, Toto?" she cried, hugging me to her and running into the house. I showed her the hat in my mouth, shook it for her to be quite sure she noticed how clever I'd been. "You rescued Uncle Henry's hat!" I was so pleased that she was pleased. "You're such a clever Toto. Don't you drop it now. We've got to get ourselves safe out of this storm, else we'll be blown to smithereens. Aunt Em and Uncle Henry are waiting for us down in the cellar, but I couldn't really leave you behind, could I? I ain't going down there without Toto, I told them. And now I got you, and that's where we're going right now. I know you don't like it in the dark, Toto, but it's safe down there, so like it or lump it, you're coming with me." She was right. I hated it down in that cellar. Never did like the dark, still don't. I could see the trapdoor open on the far side of the room. I could hear Aunt Em and Uncle Henry hollering for us to hurry up. Dorothy managed to get the front door shut against the wind, with the house shaking all round us, shaking so bad I thought that old twister was going to make splinters of it any moment. Cups and saucers, jugs and plates smashed on the floor. Drawers flew open. Knives and forks and spoons and kettles and pots and pans rattled and crashed. Chairs and cupboards and dressers tipped over. I was never so scared in all my life. We were halfway across the room when the strangest thing happened. The trapdoor slammed itself shut, and all of a sudden, with shaking and roaring, whistling and wailing, simply stopped. I heard Aunt Em and Uncle Henry still calling for us down below in the cellar, but their voices were coming fainter and fainter every moment. Then, all was silence. The whole house was swaying now, and we were swaying with it. Dorothy fell onto her knees, but never let go of me. She crawled to her bed in the corner, and we curled up there, holding on to one another, wondering what had happened, what was going to happen. "We're floating, Toto," Dorothy cried, "floating on the air right in the middle of the twister. We're flying, Toto." She called out for Aunt Em and Uncle Henry, but there was no reply. "We're all alone," Dorothy said, her voice trembling a bit. "But don't you worry none. I'll look after you, Toto. You know I will." And I did know that, so I wasn't worried. Not as much as I had been, anyway. There was blue sky outside the window now, and we were flying up and out of the clouds. There was hardly a sound. I wasn't frightened at all anymore. I did feel a little sick though, what with all this floating about in the air, especially when the house lurched and tipped and rocked about. "We'd better lie down, Toto," said Dorothy, "and close our eyes, then we'll feel better." So that's what we did. And pretty soon, what with all that gentle swaying and rocking, we were both of us fast asleep, her arm around me, my head in her lap, Uncle Henry's hat right beside me. She'd told me to look after his hat, so that's just what I was doing. Chapter 2 is called Landing in the Land of Munchkins, but we'll get to that tomorrow. Okay, I hope you like the start of that one, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow. Okay, have a great day. Bye.